Hello, in this broadcast, the program time. All world information services are beginning their broadcasts today with reports from Japan. The scale of the catastrophe there is only beginning to become evident. I'll say right away that from the last reports from the Consulate General in Osaka, there are no Russian citizens who suffered as a result of the earthquake. This earthquake literally shook the entire country. By its scale, it's unequaled since the time of the Second World War. As information continues to flow in, the number of casualties grows constantly. Here's information received at the beginning of the second day. Almost 2,500 people have died, more than 1,000 are considered to be missing, and there are more than 13,000 injured. It sounds like an update from a battlefield. Alas, this is the result of a cataclysm which man is powerless against. In Kobe, Osaka, and other cities, entire blocks of homes have been decimated. Fires are blaring pervasively. Firefighters are not managing to extinguish them at all. The majority of industrial plants are closed. Banks and stores are also closed. In many areas, railway and vehicular traffic has been severed. Even the famous high-speed highway over the island Honshu didn't withstand. In this connection, many people ask the question, how could this happen? Because in the last decades, construction throughout was carried out according to the strictest seismic norms. Now the main objective of the rescuers is to pull survivors out from under the rubble. Involved in this are defense forces, the police, and volunteers. For now, Japan has turned down outside help. The material damage as a result of this earthquake is calculated from $20 to $140 billion. But the saddest thing of all is that seismologists predict a repeat of a similar natural disaster in the course of the next month. According to the last reports, there are more than 3,000 casualties, and evidently because of the events in Japan, Interfax today reported that in Russia, under the threat of closure, is the entire seismic network. In the draft budget for 1995, its financing is not foreseen at all. In Russia, the main events, as previously are occurring in Chechnya, are concerning the Chechen events. Today, the first official exchange of prisoners of war between Russia and the Chechen sides occurred. It occurred in the Cossack village Asinskaya in the west part of Chechnya, and as a correspondent of Interfax reports, the private Sergei Kuznetsov from the Kemerovo district, who was imprisoned the 5th of January in Grozny, was exchanged for the 17-year-old insurrectionist from the village Orekhova, the Achkhamartansk region of Chechnya. His name is Musul Bitman. He was taken prisoner on the 28th of December near the village Akhankala. On the 19th of January, in the same place, an exchange should take place of 5 Chechens for 5 Russian soldiers. Through teletype tapes, we're receiving much information from Chechnya. Here are just some of the headlines. The northern and western groups of the federal forces have united near the presidential palace in Grozny. The delegation of the OSCE intends to visit the conflict zone. After yesterday's meeting with the Premier of Russia, the Dudayev envoys left for Grozny. Mothers of Russian soldiers are demanding that authorities immediately cease combat in Chechnya and that they publicize a list of casualties of the Chechen conflict. Meanwhile, from Chechnya, news is arriving that the Dudayev gunmen intentionally are blowing up homes of peaceful residents. This morning in Grozny, unlawful militarized groups several times attempted to counterattack positions of the federal forces, Interfax reported, citing a report of the Minister of Defense in Mozdok. This is explained by the striving of the gunmen to make their way out of the center of the city, which in essence is blockaded by the Russian army. In the opinion of the military, even if a truce agreement is reached, it's unlikely the gunmen will stop resistance. Dudayev will use the breather in order to remove his group from the surrounded Grozny. There is no other means for the general and his supporters to leave the city. Possibly that's why yesterday in Moscow, Dudayev supporters spoke about a truce. Official Russian authorities confirmed nothing. Moreover, today the deputy head of the press service of the government, Mr. Grushin, directly stated in an interview to Interfax that merely an exchange of views occurred with Dudayev representatives and nothing more. During that exchange, Moscow again demonstrated, according to Grushin, the firmness of its position. There will be a ceasefire only after the surrender or buying back of weapons from the illegal formations, so it's unlikely Dudayev Dudayev will get his desired break, although overall developments of the operational situation today acquired a feebly progressing nature. Federal forces undertook no active measures against the Home Guard, which controls the presidential palace. The Dudayev residence is guarded by 120 gunmen. They've worked out a mechanism of periodic rotation using underground communications in the building. There's also around 50 soldiers in prison, says the press service of the government of Russia. And according to Interfax, in the rear of the federal forces, Chechen regiments are active, of several tens of people. According to the Chechen side, the Russian command is also trying to infiltrate the rear of the enemy with spies, saboteurs, and snipers. Soldiers' mothers demanded today that combat be ceased, that lists of casualties be published, and also that they be given control over distribution of humanitarian aid. In their opinion, aid goes not to those who need it or for whom it's intended. An aid of another sort is being prepared by the Ural subdivisions of the Ministry of Emergency Situations and Civil Defense. Today, they were sent to Chechnya. The Ural specialists will be sifting through the rubble and exhuming bodies and injured persons from under it. Interfax reports that commandeered to Chechnya also were representatives of military design offices. The trips of the designers is connected with the low effectiveness of the performance of the Russian military technology in Grozny. Today arriving in Nazran from Moscow were the economics minister and the prosecutor general of the Chechen Republic. Pursuant to the agreement achieved yesterday during the talks with Viktor Chernomyrdin, Taimas Abubakarov and Usman Imayev should today have sat at the dialogue tables with the command of the military operation in Chechnya on the topic of ceasefire. But at the appointed hour, the representatives of the federal forces did not appear in Nazran. The attempts of the authorized Commissioner on Human Rights, Sergei Kovalov, and the Vice President of the Republic in Ingushetia, Boris Agapov, to establish the whereabouts of General Rokhlin, who was to head the dialogues on the side of the military department, led to no success. Today, another set of dialogues were not held in Tolstoy-Yurt regarding the handing over of Russian paratroopers. Meanwhile, this search center of the Russian branch of the Red Cross is looking for people who have lost contact with relatives or those missing in Chechnya. These are the telephone numbers to find out the fate of relatives or friends: 921 40 95 and 928 78 94. As it is known, the press secretary of the President of Russia, Vyacheslav Kostikov, appealed to the liberal intelligentsia to understand the actions of the president in Chechnya and again support Boris Yeltsin. The intelligentsia has not responded loudly, but the National Bolsheviks have responded. The National Bolshevik Party, with its leader Edward Limonov, they have reacted. The National Bolsheviks unconditionally support the war in Chechnya. It's natural that given any opportunity, correspondents are attempting to personally clarify Boris Yeltsin's position. Today, our film crew did manage to do that. In a few days, we will be completing our armed actions, and there, the Ministry of Internal Affairs will be functioning from the point of view of law and order and protecting the Chechen population. The restoration by ministries and departments of buildings and infrastructures there, and the organization of trade, humanitarian aid, providing finances, etc. Furthermore, we are attempting to legitimately achieve elections there and to confirm the Chechen government, namely a Chechen government, of course not without Russians, because there is a Russian population in the Chechen Republic. That is, that this should follow a legal path. We don't want to hold dialogues with Dudayev, who has simply organized a genocide against his own people. And thirdly, all-encompassing aid to the Chechen people in all their matters. And so, correspondingly, we appeal to the subjects of our federation so that they should provide humanitarian aid. I must say that this humanitarian aid from the subjects of the federation is very active even currently. And we must only arrange that that humanitarian aid not be stolen. I'm in strict control of the force structures, and each day I know about the situation. Each day. And please have in mind that without my knowledge, nothing serious is occurring there. Today, quite sensational information was heard by journalists at the press conference of a general who spent almost 1 year in a Dudaev prison. There was no court or investigation. They didn't need this. Their objective was to isolate me from the public. And moreover, I had asked our fellows whether, and they said there were many letters arriving at the television station requesting that they tell of our fate. There were instructions ordered that my name be committed to oblivion so that it not be mentioned in mass media. This was the manual of press conference on Old Square. In 1993, the general gathered 500 armed people. This regiment was the psychological factor which affected Dudaev. Later, he commanded the anti-Dudaev opposition and was imprisoned and was a hostage for 10 months. He's only been in Moscow 5 days. Yesterday, he met with Viktor Stepanovich Chernomyrdin, and in 1 hour, he expressed his opinions and proposals on the Chechen problem. To the journalists, Ibrahim Abrahamovich said that there is no front there. A war among clans built on lies and betrayal is underway, and the Russian army is attempting to stop them and restore lawful rule in Chechnya. No one is submitting to Dudaev. But why did the confrontation grow into such proportions where the foundation is death and murder? Money plays the paramount role in Chechnya, oil and money. The entire team of Dudaev, whoever prepared it for the seizure of power, even those who were working on the side, and the team which he gathered has that aim, oil. Their first business they did on those weapons which they got after the withdrawal of forces, because weapons were being sold left and right, and it dispersed to Dagestan, Kabarda, Southern Ossetia, Ingushetia, and even to any place where there was a demand and they could be delivered. That was the first business, and then the oil line was next. And speaking of which, billions of dollars are lying abroad. Almost 10 to 12 million tons of oil enter Chechnya from Russia through pipelines. They produce 3.5 to 4 million tons of oil. This is an enormous amount of money. Weapons spread along the entire northern Caucasus region. There is no guarantee that those weapons will not shoot. The first shot was in Ossetia in the Ingushetian conflict. Now, the source of evil is clear. Money, weapons, and oil. The Chechen crisis raised the problem of the partially armed Caucasus republics. And now about the sufferers. According to the press service of the government of Russia, during the period of the Chechen conflict, medical aid in the republic was provided to almost 2,500 patients. Of them, 700 were injured. According to reports of certain information agencies, hospitals in this area have a dire need for blood. The Federal Immigration Services of Russia, with the Ministry of Emergency Situations, is conducting organized evacuation of displaced persons. Because of the Chechen conflict through Kislar, just like through other regions and cities of Dagestan bordering with Chechnya, refugees have passed and continue to pass. Currently, there are 1,500 here, mostly they are women and children, Russians, Chechens, and of other ethnic origins. I was left without a house, and there are probably many like this who are left without a means for survival. People left with only packages. What we saw was unpleasant. And where will I return to now, I don't know. Everything is being done to settle them. And because, since the beginning of September of last year, there is no railway movement throughout Chechnya, the town on the Terek River is the only point where refugees can board trains headed for Moscow, Astrakhan, Rostov, and other Russian cities. Those who have already registered, they get free passage, and furthermore, until recently, the poorly adapted Kislar railway station absorbed the entire flow from the central regions of the country into the Dagestani Republic. Humanitarian aid for refugees is delivered here, construction materials, and in a word, everything necessary for life. How and why did weapons at one time end up in Chechnya? To date, this question remains unclear. But what is even more dangerous is the volume of weapons in the possession of the population is still in very large quantities, and not only in Chechnya. A true weapons arsenal, 44 grenade launchers, here they are in new packages, tens of TNT shells and grenades, rounds of ammunition, detonator cords, detonators, 6 seal boxes with cartridges were found by the prosecutor of the Chernihovsky region in the Kaliningrad district in the private garage leased by an ensign of the local military detachment. An investigation was launched. I won't predict the results, but I will permit myself to share the version expressed by professionals of the prosecutor, the militia, and counterintelligence who for a long time were studying routes of movement of weapons through the Chernihovsky customs station. It's headed for neighboring countries of the Baltic region where big money is paid for it, and later the weapons surface in Chechnya, Tajikistan and other regions. The reason for the massive theft of weapons, of course, is in the negligent, careless storage of it. About certain cases, some commanders simply keep silent and don't report it. But there is a main reason here. It's in the collapse of the army, the redislocation of a large number of military units, and the shortage of personnel. The first cause is in unwise policies. Combat actions in Chechnya and political storms in Moscow. The processes seem to be proceeding in parallel. Today, a principally significant meeting was expected in the Federative Council. The top leaders of the country were invited, and here's the result of the day. Not having terminated combat operations in the Northern Caucasus, the government of Russia today seems to have received a real opportunity to hold a confrontation with the higher chamber of parliament as well. The matter is that to discuss the question on the situation in Chechnya, citing busyness, the Federative Council was not attended by those invited yesterday. They were the President of Russia, the head of the government, and the force ministers. Only the acting prosecutor of Russia, Alexei Yelyshenko, arrived. The reaction of the senators was painful and at the same time aggressive. Suggestions followed, from self-suspension of the chamber to dismissal of the parliament, of the president, dismissal of Chernomyrdin, Grachov, and Yerin. Several deputies called for a removal of the signature of the Federative Council from the agreement on social accord. It was also suggested to cease financing for the combat operation in Chechnya. Extremely negative was the assessment of the inclusion of Vladimir Shumeka into the Security Council and the function of the council itself. This is what I'm saying during this recent time. I'm not speaking about before, but now a clandestine, dictatorial, unlawful organ has emerged, which is named in capital letters, in quotation marks, the Security Council. It controls and is conducting a civil war. If we are deputies of these people, we are obligated, first of all, to liquidate the juridical power and find an opportunity now to invalidate this new Politburo. I'll add that the Federative Council extended today until the 15th of May the deployment of the contingent of the Russian armed forces in the zone of the Georgian Abkhazian conflict to support peace. The business day of the State Duma of Russia today was also dedicated to many questions, and I'll say immediately that the deputies declined the proposal to examine the question of dismissal of the Minister of Defense, the General of the Army Pavel Grachov. In the Ministry of Defense, as we were told in the Department of Information and Press, significant changes are occurring. From the 1st of January, a new staff structure of the ministry took effect. It was ratified by the President, and in that connection, the number of deputy ministers is decreased from 8 to 5 people. So, in the near future, a decision will be made about employing in state service the generals Boris Gromov, Georgy Kondratyev, Valery Mironov. And more information which directly affects the Chechen topic, again from the State Duma. The Parliament of Russia intends to hear reports from the representative of the leadership of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the FSK on the state of security in the capital. This decision was adopted by suggestion of Vladimir Zhirinovsky, who ostensibly has information about the insurgents into Moscow of armed groups. The meeting of Yeltsin with Zhirinovsky is in the President's plan in the framework of consultations with factions. This was stated to Interfax today, but the schedule was not yet set out. It would be extremely strange to expect that in the new abroad, full approval would be expressed for the operation in Chechnya. This was stated at a press conference in the State Duma by Konstantin Zaturin. As a result of today's CIS test for endurance, he noted, it's evident that in 1995 we can seriously count on a breakthrough in integration only in relations between Russia and Belarus. This will be the focus of efforts of the Russian Parliament. Konstantin Zaturin said, we hope on the support of the Supreme Soviet of Belarus. Today, the State Duma adopted an appeal to the Sejm of Lithuania regarding preparations for the deportation of a group of Russian citizens from there. But the main thing which the State Duma talked about and will make many happy was the adoption of the law on increasing from the 1st of February of the minimum salary levels and minimum pensions to 54,100 rubles. We're speaking of an increase in the minimum compensation for labor, but a minimum wage level is connected with an entire series of basic basic social benefits, benefits for children, infant bonuses, and benefits for the multi-children family stipends. In other words, the lion's share of the expenditures to be carried by the government in increasing minimum salary levels in accordance with the law will go not specifically towards salary. That will affect only minimum wage workers, but will go toward the increase by 2.6 times of these social payments. In other words, we can congratulate all the students and all those receiving various social benefits with their real increase of their real revenues. Today, finally, they examined the question about confirming the deputy powers of Sergei Mavrodi. The deputy mandate was confirmed because there were no protests against the election in the Matyushinsk district where Mavrodi ran, entered either the court or the Central Election Commission. Information regarding events in Chechnya comes constantly, and I was just brought some news into the studio. You've already seen information from Nazran about the fact that dialogues fell through between the representatives of Chechnya, who yesterday spoke with the premier, and with our military. Sergei Shachrai has just phoned our studio and conveyed the following. During talks between Viktor Chernomyrdin with Dudayev representatives, they assured the Prime Minister that they are in control of the field commanders in the city of Grozny and can ensure a ceasefire for contacts in order to resolve the problem. The military command has appointed the generals Rokhlin and Babichev. The fact that the Dudayev representatives are still in the city of Nazran and undertook no efforts for the meeting or for a ceasefire immediately in Grozny is evidence of the fact that they are not in control of field commanders and are not in charge of the situation in the city or are attempting to play an underhanded political game. The government of Russia is concerned over attempts to lower Ingushetia and its leadership into the Chechen crisis. In general, information is quite contradictory and it's difficult to understand the truth. Today, there's also information from so-called hot points. Specifically, the irreconcilable Tajik opposition is preparing a series of armed provocations against Russian border troops. This, a correspondent of Vitartas learned from competent military sources. The situation is complicated further by economic problems. The now systematic incidents on the Badakhshan stretch of the Tajik-Afghan border were augmented by one more woe. In the Darvazk region, the first cases of death by starvation were recorded. Gorny Badakhshan, which is connected with the rest of the republic only by one auto lane, in the winter period when the mountain passes are covered with snow, are completely severed from the mainland. During this very cold winter, the condition of the mountain peoples was complicated even furthermore. Their miserable food supplies dwindled, there is no fuel, and because of the absence of fuel and extreme cold winter, the winter vacations in school were extended until the end of February. Constant clashes at the border area Pyanch, life under constant terror, are exacerbating the depressing picture. It's especially difficult for the elderly and children. They can only be helped by air. By instructions of the President Rakhmonov to the Darvazk region, 10 tons of flour was sent in. The cargo was delivered by helicopters of Russian border troops in Tajikistan. And now the news of the Russian economy. The beginning of dialogues with the delegation of the International Monetary Fund regarding the budget of Russia and loans in the sums of billions of dollars were postponed until the 23rd of January, although the delegation arrived in the capital today. They're waiting for the State Duma to adopt the budget. Apart from that, representatives of the International Monetary Fund in several Western countries are concerned that these loans may be applied to cover expenditures connected with the Chechen conflict. Meanwhile, the exchange rate of the dollar today at trading in the Moscow interbank currency exchange rose again by 22 points, and that is for the American dollar. Today they give 3,883 rubles. Also noteworthy is the figure revealed by the State Committee of Statistics through Tartas channels. The level of the consumer spending in Russia during the year 1994 grew by 3.5 times. That is, and also the increase was the same in prices for goods and services. In these cold January days, Viktor Stepanovich Chernomyrdin brought true joy to the much-suffering Ivanovsky textile workers. By special resolution of the government for the textile plants of the district, time limits were deferred for budget payments and payment of credits. Additional billions are allotted for the program to restrain unemployment, which is the highest in Russia currently, for the purchase of raw materials. The textile industry always yielded 1/3 of all budget revenues of the country. Is it possible that today we don't need this money? 75 billions in discount credits the government of Russia allotted to the Ivanovo plant before the signing of this document And although the money in current days is not significant, certain factories not only have resumed work on normal schedules, but even paid all their old debts. So it's very deceptive to call the textile sector a bottomless financial pit. Yes, if in 1992 the government had basically indexed the volume of turnover funds for the company, the Ivanovo district would never have become a zone of economic disaster as it is today. The government of Moscow, this is according to Interfax, from the 20th of January will increase by 50% fares for the use of public city transportation. Beginning Friday, one fare for a metro, trolley car, trolleybus, or buses will cost 600 rubles. And today there was certain panic which arose because of the behavior of cashiers in stores. They were refusing to accept 50,000 denomination notes. Rumors about another monetary reform for several days are circulating stubbornly through the city. I offer for your attention the investigation of our correspondent Natalia Chernysova. The attempt to clarify the truth of the matter was there a secret package from the central bank? Was there a threat to freeze currency accounts? Was it planned to revoke the 50,000 denomination banknotes? We began with the banks themselves. In two in a row, located along the Kutuzov Prospect, there was no panic observed, nor agitation, and the directors unanimously answered. Rumors, which, as everyone else, we do hear, but we have received no instructions from the directors regarding our operations. Accounts are operating normally. There is no mass exodus of clients. The questions, of course, in our circles are asked. Both banks are freely accepting and issuing any currency or rubles. Specialists feel that in the current times, when in the country more than 2,500 commercial banks are operating and 40,000 branches, to issue such instructions in principle is impossible because the government freezes accounts in order to derive currency. But to force businessmen to part with their capital will be impossible. These thoughts were confirmed by the deputy chairman of the central bank, Alexander Khandruyev. I can state with full responsibility that no replacement of banknotes, no freezing of currency accounts or secret packages exist nor are foreseen. Currently, unfortunately, the inflationary processes continue, and inflation is playing the role of a monetary reform. For the sake of the objectivity of our study, I wish to add that Anatoly Chubaits didn't wish to discuss this problem today, and also the acting chairman of the central bank, Tatiana Paramonova, refused to do this, perhaps because everyone was at a meeting. Regarding the future policy of reforms, and as you know, during the last days there were also many rumors circulating about the closing down of privatization. Today our correspondent managed to ask this question of the President of Russia. To the question of the journalists regarding several unfortunate statements made by the Deputy Chairman of the Ministerial Council, Vladimir Polivanov, the President said, "Well, you know, from the peripheral areas, this person ended up in such a responsible position. And he didn't understand that he would have to work within one team. He didn't understand that the government must develop its unanimous point of view and then fight for it. And I think that we will correct this situation in the next day or so. Nothing is changing in the strategy or the tactics of reforms in Russia, either from the side of the president or from the position of the government. There will be no changes." Anatoly Chubaits, who will head the delegation of Russia at the World Economic Forum in Davos, will state on the instructions of the president that any changes in the economic course of Russia cannot even be considered. Russia today is extremely interested in investments. Today is the first day of the work of the largest international exhibit of the year in Moscow, Consum Expo 95. Set aside for the exhibit was the entire enormous complex on Krasna Presna. More than 1,000 firms from 40 countries offer their goods in this unique department store. It's characteristic that to the invitation of the organizers of the exhibit, Expo Center, mostly firms from industrially developed countries responded. This reflects the interest of the Russian purchasers in high-quality and accessible goods, which last year, 1994, led to almost a 10% increase in imports from the countries of mostly Western Europe, the United States, and Japan, and a decrease from the former bloc countries and developing countries. Overall, in the area of consumer goods and foods, Russia bought abroad last year to the tune of a little less than 15 billion, and this is significantly more than in 1993. The foreign participants at the exhibit feel that the increased competition for customers can lead to a decrease in retail prices if new duties or taxes are not introduced, especially since on the Russian market, Russian companies and firms are much more active. And so, unlike the exhibits of the last years, in this one, the domestic producers are taking part and not middle firms offering imported goods. And again, politics. The president of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, met with the president of Tatarstan, Mentemir Shamiev. Interaction between the Republican and federal organs of rule was the central issue. The president of Tatarstan told the president of Russia about the social political situation in his republic and preparations for the coming elections of the state assembly. The head of Tatarstan stated that he repeated his December proposal to the president to convene a council of the heads of the republics within the framework of the federation, which, in his opinion, would facilitate a constructive resolution of the Chechen crisis. And today many questions must be viewed through the prism of Chechen events. These are both internal political problems and naturally international ones. The Clinton administration is examining the question about holding a summit in Moscow between the presidents of the United States and Russia. However, a decision has not yet been made. This was said to a correspondent of Vichar TASS in a telephone conversation by an employee of the apparatus of the White House who asked to remain anonymous. The current Geneva meeting between the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Andrei Kozyrev, and his counterpart, the American Secretary of State, Warren Christopher, on the surface didn't differ from all the previous ones. However, to call it a usual or a regular meeting would be incorrect, and not because it was held on the agreement between the presidents of the two countries. Its significance is defined by the agenda, including almost all the questions, just as the two-sided Russian-American relations and basic international problems. Undoubtedly, the Chechen crisis couldn't help but affect the general backdrop of the meeting, and yet its participants were more concerned for the future of Europe, for which, on one hand, on a high level, there's examination and approval underway of a new model of security and stability. On the other hand, the NATO bloc is actively broadening and changing. During the dialogues, which alternated between the American mission and the post-press of the Russian Federation in the UN, they discussed also questions connected with regional crises and several military political problems, in the resolution of which the positions of sides differ for now, and at times significantly. Our meeting indicates that despite such internal complications, which we have, for example, Chechnya, and in their country they have the emergence of essentially an oppositional Congress from a different party with a completely different international agenda, apparently. And yet we maintain the opportunity to speak in a friendly way and to speak constructively about those issues. I think I will have something to report to the President to make a decision, and we will emerge out onto a very solid, but without any rashness or carelessness, partnership with NATO and the United States. The head of the Russian government hosted today the Deputy Prime Minister of Kuwait, the Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmedah Al-Sabah, who arrived in Moscow on an official visit. The meeting was held behind closed doors. However, it is known that they discussed the realization of 5 two-sided agreements signed during the visit of Viktor Chernomyrdin to Kuwait last November. Russia counts mostly on realizing an agreement to facilitate investments, and on its hand offers to the participation of our oil workers in developing oil sites in Kuwait. And although during the 4 years since the Iraqi invasion the Emirate fully has restored its oil industry, Kuwait still faces the problem of cleaning the sediments and sites of the former oil lakes. In these and other projects, Russian specialists can be involved if the Kuwait government sees it to be economically lucrative and politically feasible. And now Italy. The new cabinet of ministers were sworn in Italy, and yet the government crisis continues. Representatives of the right parties of Italy intend to vote in Parliament against confidence in the new national government, which it was formed by the famous Italian economist Lamberto Dini. The leader of the bloc of right forces, the former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi, stated that his supporters will give a vote of confidence to the cabinet of Dini under one condition, that for the 4th of June, early parliamentary elections should be scheduled. Berlusconi accused Dini, who in his government occupied the post of Minister of the Treasury, of betrayal and said that in the new government, intentionally worthy candidates were excluded from the right wing and it's oriented too much toward communists. And now a report of our personal correspondent about the work of the security services of the FRG. The Service of Foreign Intelligence of Germany decided to turn to the government with a request of immediate allotment of 50 million marks to buy equipment which would permit tapping of telephone conversations of the latest European cellular communications network D2. The openly expressed despair and helplessness of investigators explained simply. Electronics technicians of several private companies have developed the latest and, for now, invincible radio telephone network. In just months, it spread to, first of all, Germany and later to the European Union countries, and by the end of the year will reach Japan and the Southeast Asian region. Yes, the police say, it's very convenient and democratic, but not just businessmen and journalists pay for the expensive communications. The main investors, as special services assert, are criminals who have received a unique opportunity to become invincible on the air. The police feel that up to 90% of all criminal deals are made by mobile telephones, and hence they are attempting to blame the failure in their battle with organized crime onto the sharks of the new telecommunications. Will the government of the FRG allot the needed millions to the special services is not clear yet, but the subscribers are pleased. Through the broadening of cellular telephones, the prices on cellular phones is lowering. In the last year, they decreased by 30%, and the army of owners has grown by 1/4. One can have a few drinks and calmly sit at the wheel of a car without being intoxicated and not fearing the police. This may not be in the realm of the imagination. That is what some American scientists think. Not divulging their secret, they clearly hint at the fact that they are very close to developing an agent which is capable of fulfilling the dreams of some people, to indulge in bacchanalian pleasure and without repercussions. One of the most sensational thefts in Russia in the last days has been the theft of the ancient manuscripts from the Russian National Library in St. Petersburg. This theft now is connected with the name of the famous attorney Dmitry Yakubovsky, who is defended by a no less prominent attorney, Yenrich Pada. It seems that the balance of scales bearing accusations against Dmitry Yakubovsky has tipped. 22 days after his detainment, the famous Moscow attorney was charged in involvement in the manuscript theft from the Russian National Library in the middle of December of last year. Then more than 90 most valuable manuscripts were stolen, the earliest dated back to the 6th century. Soon after all the manuscripts were confiscated from the criminals, one of whom turned out to be the personal bodyguard and chauffeur of Yakubovsky. Possibly this was the motive for the detainment of General Dima. It's not excluded that the famous Moscow attorney had displeased someone. His exposure of the corruption of highest official, the involvement with the scandal with the Siabek firm, give basis to presume that Yakubovsky was simply framed. On a national scale, a far less significant loss occurred in Moscow. The Veterans Council of the 106th Guard Vislinsky Order of the Nevsky Kutuzov Bomber Aviation Regiment printed 500 copies of this calendar for its veterans with portraits of heroes, and it disappeared. For the veterans, it's a great loss. Please help and return them. And now the news of culture. Soon, an anniversary of the famous string quartet in the name Borodino will be celebrated. Raoul Defy worked on this painting for 3 decades, and that's its name, the 30 Years, the Life in Pink Light. This is one of the masterpieces of the artist and also program work, The Creed of the Master. Defy, this is his self-portrait, was convinced that art should bear and bring joy, an optimistic view of the world, and therefore he loved to paint seascapes, the regatta with the seagulls filled with light for the fresh breath of the sea. His naked figures were also simply just nice women and innocent, and the main mood of all his works was exhilaration at the creation of the one on most high, where there are even such funny colored ponies, where marvelous large-winged butterflies flutter. It seems that even the dog in the painting Hunter is smiling. One must say that in Moscow we see all this beauty for the first time. In our collections we only have one Defy landscape. But the City Museum of Contemporary Art of Paris, with great consideration, having put together this exhibit, presented for us the entire artistic path of the master. First, the apprentice of Matisse, then experiencing obsession with Degas, but always remaining himself, the master of color, present only in his works, rare musicality of line, and the main thing is, a convinced optimist. Probably that is why his art belongs to eternity now, and that is why it is so beneficial and real for us today in our difficult times. First, we decided to tell you about the wonderful exhibit, which is worth seeing, but we will also tell you about the anniversary of the musicians. Have a look. Soon, the famous string quartet in the name Borodino will celebrate an anniversary. 4 equals, 4 different ones, 4 greats, the theater of the 4 actors. This is what the newspaper writes about them. A celebration of the quartet today in the Bolshoi Auditorium of the Conservatory, an anniversary celebration dedicated to the 50th anniversary of the quartet, a fact marked in the Guinness Book of Records. If we take chronology, in 1944 they first performed as a new student quartet in the Conservatory. From 1955, by then they had found their audience and their following, became the quartet Borodino. The object of pride is probably work with the top musicians of the world, Haydn, Weser, Nigovas, Oistrakh, Richter, Rostropovich, Veserladze and Gottman, Tretyakov, Slobodianik and Mashmed. With music preferences, it's more difficult. Beethoven, Haydn, Mozart, Schumann, Schubert and Franck, and yet Shostakovich is in the lead here. His 15 great quartets were performed throughout the world. If we speak about geography, they were not only in Africa, but even in the Antarctica. And in the last year alone, London, Lisbon, Köln and Frankfurt heard them, and are Voronezh, Nizhny Novgorod, Saratov and Petersburg. And what sustains them? They live like everyone else, with rehearsals and concerts, meeting with friends and students. Valentin Berlinsky, for instance, head of the quartet, has been teaching in Gnisinka for years. And what worries them? The same as all our musicians, as they say themselves, the strange attitude of the government toward culture, when, just like the academic Likhachev, almost each day the obvious must be proven, that culture was never self-sufficient. It needs to be supported. But let's not talk about that today. Today is the music, with a full auditorium, flowers, photographers, heightened attention to the musicians, and music, of course. Good evening. Today in the Kremlin Conference Hall, the traditional ball for the Olympians was held. The celebration summarizes the results of last season for several years, as held by the National Olympic Committee and the Sport Committee of Russia. These meetings allow us to remember the heroes and the brightest individuals of the last years and pay dues to veterans. And now briefly about the main news of the day in sports. In the International Hockey League tournament, there were 3 matches. The Army beat the Sokol team 5-2, Itil the Nizhegorod Torpedo 2-0. In Moscow, the main contenders for the leadership met. They were the capital Dynamos and the wings of the Soviets. The match was extremely stubborn and no one could tilt the balance. In the score, not far before the end, the Wings moved ahead, but the Dynamos played back. Basic time ended 4-4, and overtime decided everything, but even it did not show up a victor, and so the Wings kept the leadership in the Western Zone. The women's basketball Army team won in the European Cup competitions against the Hungarian Kukskron 87-81, continue to head the chart in the group tournament. It's curious that in the middle of the first half, the Army team was losing by 16 points. Today at 23:20 on television company Ostankino, match of the men's basketball tournament, the Army versus PAOK. This match for the Army team can be called key because victory leaves them a chance to continue in the European Cup competition. At the Australian Tennis Open today on the 3rd game day, there were no major surprises. After the second round, the seeded players continue: Sampras, Courier, Larson and Stich. But a sensation was created by Andrei Arlovski. He beat the 23rd seed in the world classification, the Italian Andrei Badenza, and in the 1/16th now is the Kievan Andrei Medvedev. Good evening. The prediction of the weather for the 19th of January and the influence of atmospheric fronts, which are quickly shifting from the Atlantic, will be felt on the Kola Peninsula in the north of the Arkhangelsk district and the Nenets Autonomous District, and will bring cloudy, windy weather with snow and blizzards. Temperatures during the Dayan night from -3 to 8 in the Murmansk district, as high as +3. Tomorrow in the south of the Arkhangelsk district, in the Republic of Komi, in the Volga-Vyatsk area, the central area, under the influence of a broad anticyclone, there will be real epiphany, frost felt, morning and evening fogs possible. Temperatures in the morning hours -16 to 21, in places as low as -23. During the day, -10 to 15. In the northwestern region, in the Baltic countries and in Belarus, despite the southern winds, it's also cold during the day. Here it's -5 to 10. In Ukraine and Moldova, partly cloudy skies with some isolated patches of light snow during the night and day from -5 to -10. In the central Chernozem area and on the central Volga, tomorrow variably cloudy skies without precipitation at night down to -15, during the day between -7 and 12. The Rostov district and Volgograd area will see partly cloudy skies with some light isolated snows, and it will be colder at night, -10 to 15, during the day -7 to 12 degrees. It will be less cloudy in the Krasnodar, Remeria, in the Stavropol, Remeria, and the Ingushetia and Chechen republics. Precipitation is unlikely. In the morning and evening, patches of fog, and during the day there will be some sun. During the night and day from -5 to 8 in Dagestan, -2 to 5 degrees. Beyond the Caucasus, variably cloudy skies without precipitation. In Georgia and Azerbaijan, +3 to 8. In Armenia, +1 to 6 degrees. In Petersburg, Thursday, there will be no precipitation. At night, temperatures will be cooler, down to -11 to 13. During the day, it will be -8 to 10 degrees. In Moscow and the suburbs, it will be cold without precipitation. In the morning and evening, isolated patches of fog, temperatures from -17 to 19. Throughout the district, down to -21. During the day, -10 to 12. In places as low as -14. Winds are weak. The prediction was compiled by the Oceanic Meteorological Center of Russia. All the best.